All right. Hello and welcome to Group One's second webinar of the year. I'm David Graves, Group One sales representative, and with me I have today Chris Wilson, our marketing and communications director. Today's presentation is titled Rechecks, Why They Matter. So I want to thank you for joining us here today. Thank you, Chris, for joining me here on the call today. And thank you for all your help in making the webinar happen today.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it. So glad to be here, and I appreciate you allowing me to be a part of your HR expertise, and I'm looking forward to the webinar today.
Well, good. I'm glad to have you here today with me, kind of co-piloting and helping me make sure the slides are running smoothly today. But today we have an exciting presentation planned for our audience today. We're going to be talking about background rechecks and why they are important to consider in providing yourself a full court press, so to speak, to your background screening process. And when it comes to background screening, of course, every HR professional knows how important it is to have a complete background check, to vet a new hire when they're hiring somebody in the hiring process. But oftentimes HR professionals overlook, for different reasons, they overlook a recheck, maybe for budgeting reasons, cost restraints, things like that. Or maybe they didn't even realize that they needed to be doing rechecks on their employees. So that's if you're one of those people, this is a good day to be here for this presentation. And as we'll discuss today, rechecks are highly important and critical piece of your hiring process. And we're really going to talk about today four different areas of rechecks or four different types of rechecks. It's going to talk about the criminal rechecks, sanction and exclusions, motor vehicle rechecks, and then one that other people often don't think about is drug retesting as a recheck. And at the end of the program today, we will have a question and answer time where you'll get to ask questions about the topic. And so just to let you know about that, go ahead and enter those questions in the chat box. And then today I want to preference our webinar by saying that we are not attorneys. I think you have a slide for this. There it is.
We're out of the yellow slide.
Thank you, Chris. The information and opinions expressed are for educational purposes only and are based on current practice, industry-related knowledge, and business expertise. The information shall not be construed as legal advice, express or implied. And of course, as always, consider and consult with your legal counsel when it comes to background screening compliance issues, because Chris and myself, neither one are attorneys, or at least I'm not an attorney, unless Chris has studied for the bar exam since I last talked to him.
I have not, nor am I an attorney.
So that would be a good reason not to take our advice as legal advice, but use it as good information. And also always, like I said, consult with your attorneys for the very final say when it comes to this type of information. But the information that we do to provide today, we hope it will be helpful in your selection and hiring process and give you better insight into what it takes to build a strong background screening program. All right. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is the importance of background checks and background rechecks. Let's see here. So you're trying to really throw me off here as we get started.
I would like to ask you a question real quick.
Go ahead.
Now, how many private investigators work with the Group One? Is everyone a registered private investigator?
Yeah, all of our researchers actually, and that's a great question, all of our researchers are licensed through the state of Texas as a private investigator. And that's part of the requirements of our us being a CRA, Consumer Reporting
Agency. Like 100% then, right?
100%, including myself as a private investigator, which is kind of scary.
Well, that's why I put that graphic there. So there you go.
All right, so let's talk about background rechecks. They become increasingly crucial in today's environment for many, many reasons. First reason is workplace safety. Regular background checks, regular background checks help ensure that employees continue to meet the safety standards required for their roles. And of course, this is particularly important in industries where employees have access to sensitive information or they're working with vulnerable populations. For example, hospitals, healthcare clinics, schools, first responders, all of these have employees that are engaged with either patients or maybe children. And so because of that, it's utmost critical to make sure that you always have a safe workplace. You may have had a safe workplace when you hired your employee staff, but do you still have a workplace if you aren't continuously checking to see if maybe they have sex offender registry violations in their past or maybe a criminal background that maybe happened after they started working for you? So number one reason why to do rechecks is to make sure that you have a safe workplace. Next reason would be compliance and regulations. Many industries have strict regulations that require ongoing background checks to maintain compliance. And that helps avoid legal issues and potential fines that can be pretty hefty. For example, hospitals maintain compliance with CMS to avoid fraud with Medicare or Medicaid programs, and the Office of Inspector General to avoid fraud, abuse, and waste in healthcare programs. And then there's also the Joint Commission, which is an independent nonprofit organization that plays a crucial role in improving healthcare quality and safety. I'm sure that, and I didn't do enough research for today's presentation, but I'm sure there's other industries like aviation or probably the legal profession that have other requirements that are that make it important to do a recheck to stay compliant with their industries and their organization. And then the third reason is protecting your company's reputation.
This is a big one.
It is a big one, especially in today's world where you have so many people in multimedia, social media places where you're really working hard to make sure that your reputation is protected. But what happens if you have an employee that's working for you that, say, you're a child care or a daycare system or something like that, and you hired the person at the time of hire and they were fine, but come to find out a year or two later after they started working for you, they sexually abused a small child and now they're working for you and a danger now to your current company as far as safety, but they're also a danger to your reputation because once that hits the Channel 6 news tonight, more than likely you probably have lost all of your business the next day because no parent's going to take their child to your daycare after you let somebody work there that had a violation like that. So protecting your company's reputation is very, very critical and important. Next one, verifying credentials. Ensuring that employees' qualifications and credentials remain valid over time is also essential. For example, that includes verifying educational qualifications, professional licenses, and work history. Before coming here, I was a human resource HR generalist, and I had my PHR certification. I since have not and don't have that still qualification because every 3 years, I think you had to have 60 credits to maintain your PHR certification. And so if they were to check my certification today, obviously I wouldn't have that. And so if that was important to your company to be checking that that certification, then I would want to keep on an ongoing basis checking that.
Yeah, I would think that would be important in healthcare too, right?
Oh, absolutely. So you want to make sure that your nurse still has a license to still be practicing as a nurse or a doctor or your anesthesiologist, whatever. So yeah, making sure that they have all the qualifications. And let's see here, the fifth part, risk of fraud. So you want to make sure that you're also running rechecks to reduce the risk of fraud. Background rechecks help detect any discrepancies or fraudulent activities that might have occurred after the initial hiring process. So you always want to make sure you'll be checking that as well to make sure that you're not risking yourself with the potential of somebody that's working for you now that may be frauding your company now. So all of these reasons and probably many more are all valid reasons for making sure that you're doing your rechecks. Overall, background rechecks are just really a proactive measure just to maintain that you make sure that you maintain a safe, compliant, and a trustworthy workplace. All right, so the importance of background checks, and we're going to talk a little bit of statistics here, and how many employers conduct at least one type of background check upon hiring their employees. So the answer to the question was 96% of employers that conduct at least one type, and this was according to a survey done in 2017 by HR.com. And so the point is here is that most HR professionals know that when they hire somebody, they know that they need to run a background check on an employee at least initially, and so that's a pretty high percentage. I'm assuming that we're probably that was 2017, so that was quite a while ago, but I'm assuming we're probably still in the high 90s, probably even today. And then I'm gonna go to the next question here. So according to HR.com, they did another poll. I don't know if I have the year on that one. I thought I wrote down the year, but I don't. The other one was 2017. It might have been the same year, same poll, but they said 29% of employers conduct periodic rechecks of their employees. And so that being said, obviously there's a high percentage chance that many employers are riding blind to the fact that many of their current employers have things that they've hidden from them as an employer since the day where they were hired, or maybe even worse, many employers have no idea that they may have a convicted felon working with their patients and in hospitals, or maybe a convicted sex offender teaching students in a classroom. And
29%
so,
sounds low to me.
oh yeah, that's a very yeah, that's a low number, 29%, very low. You would want to see that rechecks number be a lot higher, I think, uh, to have a little more confidence and be able to sleep a little better at night, knowing that you don't have employees working for you that might have some skeletons in their closet, so to speak. All right, let's talk about what are background rechecks and why they are important. But first, we're going to talk about what are background checks, and that is the background check that you first run on a new hire when they begin working for your organization. You most likely check at a very minimum the essential elements of a criminal background check, such as what's there, like on the screen. You're probably checking your criminal records, county, local, national criminal records. You're probably checking sex offender registries to make sure that somebody's not on one of those in all 50 states, and then also tribal as well. Education records, you want to verify education because believe it or not, sometimes people lie about where they went to school or if they graduated from there or not. Employment history, you may want to verify that to see that people worked where they said they worked, when they worked, and the job title that they said they worked while they were there. And then, of course, professional licenses, such as a doctor practicing medicine. You probably want to make sure that the brain surgeon doing surgery on you tomorrow actually, in fact, has the knowledge and the education to actually be practicing that medicine on you. So all of those things you probably check initially, of course. But at a bare minimum, you're checking those essential criminal elements upon hire. Rechecks are similar, but not exactly the same. You recheck their records periodically, like once a year. You most likely don't need to recheck other things, though, that you may have that you checked initially, such as you may not need to recheck education, right? They probably didn't change very much over time as far as what education they might have. Maybe they did earn a degree while they were working for you, and that may be important for you to know that, especially if it's a promotion. Um, but you may not need to pay for that again necessarily for us or another background screening company to do education re-verification. Employment history, obviously they've been working for you once you hired them, so their employment probably didn't change much. Maybe they were working a second job, as the economy's been hard on everybody, so sometimes people are working second jobs, but it may not be important to you that they're working a part-time job at Walmart while they were working for you. But we can recheck education employment, but when you're doing a recheck, probably the most important thing that you're going to want to recheck on a recheck is going to be your criminal history, and that type of thing. And then also other things that you might want to recheck are sanction and exclusions. And this is really important in the hospital healthcare world, to make sure that somebody hasn't frauded Medicare or Medicaid possibly while working at another hospital. They would have a sanction or exclusion placed on them that would prevent them from working inside of another hospital. So that would be something that you would definitely want to include in a recheck, especially if you're a hospital or healthcare. Other things that people recheck are motor vehicle reports. And a lot of times we have a lot of clients here at GroupOne that check motor vehicle reports for insurance reasons, because they may have somebody that's driving for them. Maybe you have somebody that's at a senior home that is in a driving position, that driving seniors to the grocery store or to other places. You want to make sure that that person doesn't have any kind of driving violations when they're working in a sensitive population like that. And then, of course, the other retest could be drug retesting for like reasonable suspicion, random drug screening programs, and maybe for cause. Maybe somebody's in an accident and you want to test them for that reason, which is, we're going to talk about legal and compliant aspects to consider when doing background rechecks. When rechecking background checks on employees, there's several key laws and regulations to consider. First and foremost, for us as a consumer reporting agency, is the Fair Credit Reporting Act, FCRA. The federal law regulates how employers can obtain and use consumer reports, including background checks. So employers must get a written consent from employees before conducting a background check, and must provide a copy of the report and a summary of rights if any adverse action is taken on that report. And keep in mind that that really is the responsibility of the human resource department, is to make sure that you're getting an authorization, for example, to run a background check. And one of the things that we do provide as a background screening company, we work with our employers to help them with that process, which is our system can provide an automated authorization form to the candidate that they complete that says, it's okay that you run a background check on me. We also, with that, provide them a copy of the Fair Credit Reporting Act information so that they have that. And should they want it, we don't provide it unless they ask for it, but if they want it, they as a consumer are allowed to get a copy of their own background screen report. And so we would provide that upon request. But we do need to make sure that we're always following the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And then the second reason is Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, EEOC guidelines. The EEOC enforces the federal laws that prohibit employment discrimination. Employers must ensure that background checks do not disproportionately exclude certain groups based on race, color, national origin, sex, and/or religion. Additionally, employers should avoid using background information in a way that it may result in discriminating against an employee. Third one is the ban the box laws. These are laws that most HR people are probably familiar with. Then they're varying state by state, but especially in states like California and New York. I think there was 11 other states, or there are about 11 states, and I don't have all of them listed here. I was talking to somebody about them yesterday. But these restrict when employers can ask about criminal history during the hiring process. And basically, it means that when you're hiring somebody, you don't want to ever include on an application the old box that says, have you ever committed a crime? If so, can you list them here? Many states, 11 of them, I think it is now,
Yeah, it's not just
including,
states too, David. There's something within some states. It's like it varies from county to county.
yeah, but especially in the states like California and New York, and there's like Colorado was another one, Michigan. I can't remember them all by heart.
It's just
Uh,
tricky. It's really tricky. You really have to make sure that you know the laws about this.
Yeah, and probably the prudent thing to do, and what I always recommend is really follow those other states as far as what their laws are laying out. That way you never really put yourself in jeopardy of violating. All right. And then also following state and local laws, of course, various states and municipalities, even counties, like you mentioned, Chris, have additional regulations regarding background checks. These can include restrictions on the types of information that can be considered, requirements for notifying employees, and specific procedures for handling um, background check information. I was just talking about this the other day, and I'm gonna not remember it. It's Article 23A, I think it is. It's in New York. And in New York City, there's a regulation there as part of a fair chance law to give those that were convicted of crimes in the past a better chance and a fair chance at getting employment after being released from prison. And so part of that regulation is they have to be notified by the employer, this Article 23A in New York. And so it's always important to know what the state and local laws are as well when you're doing background checks, because maybe you operate out of the state of Texas, but maybe you acquire another office in another state like New York. It would be important for you to know and understand what the local laws are in that state when you're running background checks. And if you have any specific concerns or need detailed and guidance, always consult again with your legal expert um, or HR attorneys when and what they advise for you to do. All right, let's talk now about some of the critical industries that really should consider background rechecks. Running background rechecks obviously is crucial to all industries. However, there are several industries where ensuring safety, security, and compliance is paramount. And here are some of the most critical ones. Number one is healthcare. And we're here at GroupOne background screening. We've probably predominantly done probably 80% or more of healthcare type background screening for probably over 30 years now. And given the sensitive nature of patient care and access to personal health information, thorough background checks are essential to ensure the safety and trustworthiness of healthcare professionals. So, healthcare, very, very critical, very, very important. Next is education, where our children are daily in schools and education institutions. And so making sure that the teachers and the staff and even volunteers at the schools have been vetted to make sure that they're coming into the schools and they don't have some kind of a criminal background, especially um, And I'm not sure necessarily that it would always help the situation, but it certainly would be the most important prerequisite to make sure that you're checking the safety by checking the sex offender registries to make sure that sex offenders not working with your children, either as a teacher or a volunteer.
Yeah, and I do the blogs for Group One, and on almost on a weekly basis, I read about something that's taken place at a school with a teacher or volunteer, and it was because they hadn't done a recheck or a background screen on that person, and it came back
Absolutely.
later.
Absolutely. And that's why it's paramount important to make sure that uh, these types of industries, you're really doing your homework as far as doing rechecks. The other one would be financial services. Obviously, in financial places like banks, credit unions, um, Wall Street type positions, things like that, to prevent fraud and integrity things from happening in financial transactions. Background checks would be super critical for employees handling sensitive financial data and information. The other one would be transportation, ensuring obviously the safety of passengers, of goods, and requires vigorous background checks for drivers, pilots, truck drivers, all in those transportation positions to make sure not just that their Department of Transportation DOT, as far as that's being followed, but also making sure that you don't have somebody working for you in the transportation industry that could snap and commit a crime, making your workforce unsafe. Government and public sector background checks help maintain security and trust in public services, especially for positions involving national security and access to sensitive information. So making sure that all of our government and public sector is safe. And then we talked about this a little bit earlier, but childcare, protecting our children, making sure background checks are mandatory for anyone working in a childcare setting. And then this one is becoming more and more is information technology. There's so much fraud, so much scam. I know that our IT department is working overtime, and I get a little frustrated sometimes because it seems like we have, and you probably noticed this, Chris, too. We have so much security on our computers,
I have.
but but it's actually a good safeguard and it's a good thing because if we didn't have it, I understand there is so much cyber threats and so many scams and so much fraud that can happen um, in the information technology world. So making sure that you vet all of your IT professionals and making sure that those that have access to sensitive data and information, even here at Group One background screening, where we have access to sensitive information like social security numbers and dates of birth for the people that we run background checks on. We have to make sure that we vet, obviously, our employees as a background screening company extremely at a very, very high level. Just to make sure, because we would never want somebody to have access to information such as that and be able to use it for fraud or scam. All right, now we're on to the next section here, which is benefits. So what are the benefits of running background rechecks in your organization? And so a couple of things to think about here. One is the risk mitigation, just reducing the risk of fraud and misconduct inside of your organization, and then um, enhancing the workplace safety, maintaining trust, and of course, like we talked about earlier, protecting your reputation as a company. And then the next part we're going to talk about here is how to implement background rechecks inside of your organization. And hopefully you're seeing, if you haven't already, if you're not already doing background rechecks, how important and how super critical they are to be doing them inside your organization. Some of the things that you want to consider is frequency. and that's the timing of rechecks. And again, it's going to be important here to consult with your attorneys, any of your consultants, as far as what the requirements are for your specific organization or your industry. But we have clients that here at Group One who frequently run them at maybe once a month to once every quarter of the year, 4 times a year, or annually on certain other background rechecks. So some clients do it to where they do on the anniversary date of the employees that work for them. And so once a month, they will run on the anniversary date of when they were hired. They'll run a background recheck, or they may just decide that every December or every January, that's when they're going to run background rechecks on all of their employees. Or maybe they just want to do a certain set of employees once every quarter. Or if it's sanction and exclusion, we have a lot of hospitals that do those monthly. They're running sanction and exclusions on their population of their nurses or their doctors and running those. If it's motor vehicle reports, sometimes we have clients that run those once a year. And they do that a lot of times for insurance purposes for those that are in driving positions for them. Let's see here. And then other key components to include in rechecks. The key component in a recheck really is to recheck the components that may potentially change since the first onboarding of the employee. For example, you really don't need to recheck employment or education since these probably didn't change very much or very little since the employee's hire date. However, you would want to recheck their criminal history, their motor vehicle history, and any potential, especially in healthcare, for a sanction or exclusion that might prevent them from working inside your hospital or healthcare organization. Let's talk about technology and tools. Some software and platforms for efficient rechecks. Implementing background checks is very simple, really. At Group One, there's multiple ways that you can implement. For small orders of a handful, say you only have like a population of say 10 or 20 employees that you need to do rechecks on, up to large employee populations of thousands, which you could do more of a bulk order for processing those. We can provide you with, and the way we do it here at least is we have what's called batch or bulk upload for those large clients, and we do batch sanction and exclusions. And very simply, we provide you with an Excel worksheet that you just keep up to date. You'd have to make sure that you're just keeping up to date any person that was hired since the last time you ran the rechecks, and then terminate out anybody off the list that was terminated since the last time you ran those sanction or exclusions or those criminal rechecks. But very, very simple process to do that. Other ways that we can also do that is to provide you that's if you're uploading it yourself. We can also provide you an FTP type file location where you can submit the file and Group One can pick that file up and submit that for you at whatever interval you decide or choose works best for your situation. All right, let's see here. And then the other part, integrating rechecks into your existing HR process. The main thing is just to make sure that rechecks really become a regular part of your hiring process. As we mentioned throughout this presentation already, many HR professionals, of course, know that they need to run that initial check, but they don't always see the importance of doing the rechecks post-hire. So hopefully after today's presentation, you're starting to see the importance, if you didn't already know, is to start running those background rechecks on your employees.
Yeah, it's always better safe than sorry.
Always better safe than sorry. It becomes very expensive and it can become very damaging, obviously, to the reputation of your company. Let's see here. We had some case studies and some real world examples of some rechecks here, kind of to your point, Chris, of some people that learned the hard way about some expensive reasons why to do rechecks. And one of those examples was in 2018, Chicago Public Schools ended up doing a rescreening of all their employees. And according to the Chicago Tribune, the massive recheck resulted in the removal of 400 employees and volunteers and vendors. This was after they discovered
Wow.
that many of the teachers in their school districts of Chicago um, had abused some children that were inside their schools. And so, due to public pressure that happened during that time, the school district decided that it was in their best interest to run a massive recheck of their teachers and staff. And after running that, they found that I guess 400 of the volunteers and employees and vendors, it said too. So people that were working with them
I have a question
had to
for you,
be
David.
removed.
David,
Yeah, go right ahead.
they've been running rechecks rather than just doing a massive recheck. Do you think that that number of employees would not have been so high and so massive?
Yeah, because they probably would have weeded them out along the way instead of finding out after you think about, obviously children had been abused and violated. And so now you have all that trauma of families that have to deal with that heartache now.
Yeah, I'm thinking if
But
they had run regular rechecks, that number would not have been so high. Was what I'm.
absolutely, because they would have weeded them out and vetted them out along the way. And then the other example we had was the Henry Ford Health System in Detroit, Michigan. And this was a little more recently during the COVID pandemic. They quickly shifted staff to assist in the ICU roles. And this was because I guess they were having to move doctor or nurses into different roles. And because of that, there was a sensitivity. So they used rechecks to ensure that the employees that were moving into the other critical positions were still qualified to participate in those other positions and had no disqualifying records. So this wasn't really necessarily a lesson that they learned, but this was just a company learning to adapt during that time to the changing situation during COVID, where they needed to be able to let people in other roles participate in roles with patients. And so they did rechecks as kind of a proactive measure to make sure that those people were able to participate and work with patients in those
Yeah,
other roles.
they stayed on the safe side. Most of the hospitals were just flooded at that time with patients, and so I'm assuming that probably really helped them out.
I applaud them for that. All right. And then lessons learned, common challenges to overcome. So some of the lessons learned here, discovering adverse information. Uh, what to do if I discover negative adverse information on an existing employee after I run recheck. So just knowing what to do in case you do discover negative or adverse information on an existing employee after you run a background check. So always plan and be prepared ahead of time is the main thing, just in case that an event happens that you do discover that somebody violated or had some kind of negative or adverse information that you discovered after the fact, after they were hired. What are you going to do when you discover that? And that's always comes back to making sure that you're following your policies, just like you would follow your policies when you're hiring somebody, making sure that you're also following those same policies when it comes to adverse information when you discover it post-hire. And then staying legally compliant. Make sure that you have signed authorizations in place before running a background check on an existing employee, and stay informed of FCRA compliance issues. And that, what I mean by that, staying compliant and making sure that you have the authorizations in place is just making sure, for example, if you're going to do a post background check, recheck on somebody, do you have authorizations in place that protect you legally? Authorizations that we use at GroupOne background screening, we have made those very broad in their language For example, some of the language would say, do you consent to running a background check for employment, continued employment, and promotion? And so we've made the language kind of to cover the full life cycle or life career cycle of an employee while they work there. You would want to consult with your attorneys when it comes to your authorizations, but you want to make sure that those authorizations are still good. You also could consider on a recheck having them sign an authorization each time you do a recheck. But if you do have an approved authorization from an attorney and the blessing of that attorney, you probably could use one authorization that you had them sign upon hire to cover you for doing continued hire.
That was my question is, do you need to go through the authorization process all over again when you do a recheck?
It's really going to be up to you as far as what your process is going to be. And like I say, consult with your attorney on that. But we've included an authorization that does include for what we believe is for the full life career cycle of a person while they're working. Then there's also, of course, and I think this is probably the reason why so many HR professionals don't do rechecks is a lot of times because of cost considerations. Um, Rechecks can be expensive, so you really have to plan your budget to include them. And I think a lot of times they don't get included because they weren't maybe considered important. And then when doing the number crunching and working with your accounting department, they decided that this is probably a place where we could trim some costs. But at the end of the day, trimming cost on something that could be so damaging to your reputation of your company and so damaging to the safety and the well-being of the other employees that work inside your company, you really have to, as an HR professional, sometimes stand toe to toe with your bosses and your executives and express to them how important it is to make sure that you are doing recheck. To be honest, and you're welcome to give us a call, and we'd love to talk to you about setting up rechecks for your company. They really aren't as expensive as you would probably think. We discount them quite considerably because all you're really needing to do is probably check a criminal rechecks, and you may need to be doing sanction or exclusion checks, and they're really very inexpensive compared to, for sure, the cost of legal expenses that you would incur should something really bad go wrong, like we just talked about. All right, I think that brings us to the conclusion of our program. Let's see if we have any questions here. Chris, are you able to see if we have any questions?
I'm not. Could you look in the Q&A box for me, David? I do have a couple here for you, though.
Okay, let me look in the
Just tell me
chat
to
there.
fire away if you want me to.
Hang on just a second. Let me see if we have some over here.
Well, I have one here if you're ready.
Okay, go ahead.
I've heard different answers to this, and I'm going to ask you, the expert, how often should I recheck my employees? Is it quarterly? Is it annually? Is it monthly? What's going to work best for me?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it really depends upon your policy and taking into consideration, um, like we talked about, which industry you're in and what are the compliance requirements that might be associated with that industry. We talked a lot about hospitals and healthcare today because like CMS and some of those have auditing parts of the hiring process and ongoing employment factors to consider on their rechecks. And like I said earlier, many of the other industries are going to have other aspects that are really going to help you determine, how often and how many times should you be rechecking your employees. I would say if it were a criminal recheck and I was in an HR position, I would probably want to check at least once a year on a criminal recheck just to make sure that the employees that I hired haven't had some development in their criminal history that may put the other employees that are working in my company at danger.
I have a good question here, and I've often considered this one. What do I do if after I run a recheck, I discover that a long-term employee was convicted of a theft after working for us?
Okay. Yeah, and that's exactly why we're talking about rechecks here today too, of course. And I guess really like you consider adverse information when you run an initial background check. You want to make sure that you're following those same policies. If you discover that they had committed crime, after working for you. And then, if theft or other crime is part of your hiring considerations, it really should be a part of your hiring and retention policies as well.
But what if this employee was a long-term employee, well liked by everyone at the company?
Yeah, that'd probably be a little bit difficult, but in the end of the day, it's not a popularity contest. It's really more about protecting and making sure that the employees and people in your organization are safe.
It's about consistency, I would suspect too.
Absolutely.
I got a question here for you. Our company does a drug test upon hiring, but not after hire. What are some reasons I might want to retest someone for drugs?
Yeah, and like I said earlier, that's sometimes one that people don't always think about, and it all depends on what is your policy first and foremost. Do you have a safe drug workplace policy in place? And if you do, then you probably want to not only test people initially when you bring them on board, but you might want to test them ongoing. People retest for drugs for different reasons. They have random drug screening programs where they, pick one or two employees each month, and you're the lucky one in the draw. That just a sample of the population gets a random drug test. And then also reasonable suspicion. So you might want to make sure that you have a program in place that if you notice that somebody's kind of stumbling around inside your workplace or they smell of alcohol on their breath, um, you might want to send them for reasonable suspicion um, for those types of reasons. So those would be some of the reasons that you could do retesting for drug tests.
Okay, David, I think that's all the questions that I have.
All right. Well, thank you everybody for coming and attending today in our presentation. We really appreciate it.
David, that was some great information, and I wanted to thank you for providing your expertise to everyone today. And thanks for answering my questions. I learned a lot today, and this was a great webinar.
All right. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate all your help.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.